Hello, good evening, and welcome back to my channel. Today is the day before Halloween. I really wanted to read this week a bunch of scary, spooky tales for Halloween. However, I do not have that much time to be reading full books. So I went on Buzzfeed because that's clearly where you go to be consumed by books that you do not need to read. And I found this list, and it is called Short Stories That People Claim Are the Most Disturbing Ever Written. I've only read 3 of them before. And also a warning for all the short stories that I mentioned on this list, I will be giving full spoilers. So let's get into the vlog portion of me reviewing each of these short stories as I read them. Okay, so I just finished the first story, which is The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. So this short story was unique. It was 8 pages long in the document I found. Basically, it is set in this small rural town, I would say. I believe it says there are 300 citizens, and every year they have this lottery. And the entire story revolves around you not knowing what this lottery is, but everyone just showing up and expecting to be part of it. Every single person draws a paper out of this massive lottery black box. And this black box has been used for longer than anyone in the town can remember, even the oldest person that's like in his 80s or something. It's also talked about how this isn't the only town that does this, that every town does it. But you don't quite know what the lottery is. Like, what are they working to win? Is it a bunch of money? And you learn that at the end of the short story, and it is pretty horrific. Basically, only one person per family has to draw from this lottery. So let's say you have husband and wife, 2 kids, you only have to draw one lottery. However, only one person is the winner each year. And then what happens is that person gets stoned to death by the rest of the town. Yes, that is the twist at the end. So it's pretty horrific, and since it's a short story, you don't learn why are they doing this. What motive can they have? Is this like a deal with the devil? It's hinted that like their economic prosperity in the town and their growth on farmland, agriculture, is dependent upon them doing this lottery. So the only thing I can guess is that they made some sort of deal with the devil hundreds of years ago, and that they have to like sacrifice one of their own in order to keep prosperous in their community. It's a very creepy story, but I enjoyed it. Okay, I am back, and I just finished the second short story, which is the cast of, I'm gonna stop trying to pronounce it. Basically, this story follows this guy, Montessor, and he wants to seek revenge against this man, Fortunato. I'm just gonna call them M and F from now on because their names are too hard. M tells F that, there's this fancy wine, Amontillado, or whatever that word is. And I looked it up what it is, and apparently it is this type of sherry wine. It looks almost like brownish. It's apparently hard to find, hard to get. So basically, M tells F, I have a cask of this amazing wine in my massive cellar. Come down and look at it. So he follows M down there, and M ends up chaining him to a wall and goes back outside. Of course, F is startled and is like, what's happening? And then M bricks him up. He just takes bricks slowly and builds up a wall and leaves him there to die. And that's how it ends. It's a disturbing story. Okay, so I just finished the next story, and this one was Harold from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This story tells of Thomas and Alfred who take care of cattle for a couple months and then have to return the cattle to be sold. So they're kind of like cowboys? I'm not sure. But they live in this little hut, and they have this little garden, and they decide one day to make this, I would say, scarecrow, which they name Harold, and they design it after this farmer that neither of them really likes. And they, I would say, are very abusive to it. They will stuff food in its face and like talk for it and demean it. It's pretty horrific. Like during the day, they hang it outside to keep the birds away. from the garden, but at night they bring it in with them so it won't be damaged by the rain. And then they start hearing it grunt, and later on it just starts walking around. So Thomas and Alfred just decide to get out of there and take the cattle, and on their way out they discover they forgot to take the milking pails, to milk the cows, back with them. So it's still at the hut where Harold is right now. So they draw straws because neither of them want to go back with Harold there, and Thomas loses and goes back. And Alfred turns around and he sees Harold on top of the roof, spreading out a bloody skin to dry in the sun. And that's how the story ends. Out of the 3 stories I've read so far, it's my least favorite so far because I don't feel like there's enough information to really understand anything. Why did they really decide to make a scarecrow? Why did Alfred come alive? It's not enough there for me to actually feel that invested in it. So you know how I was just, oh yeah, Harold, it's definitely the worst story that I read so far. Nothing compared to the next one. So the next one is Skullpocket by Nathan Ballingrud. It is an excerpt or a short story from his 6-story collection, Wounds. Luckily, I was able to find this online because the order at my library was going to take a long time to get this. So basically, it follows this protagonist who is human but works with ghouls or ghouls in this world, and there's this extinction rite that they're luring children in and then going to kill them. There's also this orchid girl that Wormcake saved and married, and she was in a freak show. The way the ghouls work, it's kind of confusing because they can live amongst humans, but for example, Wormcake is described as his skull is open. He has no hair and no skin anymore on the top of his head. He's over 100 years old. There's the Church of the Maggot, which I think Wormcake is either a founder of or in charge of. There's just a lot. If this had been a book, I would have DNF'd it. There's all these characters and terms that you don't really learn anything about, and it is an absolute mess, this story. I'm not even sure what the author was trying to achieve. Absolute mayhem. So yeah, definitely did not enjoy this story. But moving on to the next one, which is the Neil Gaiman one, Snow, Glass, and Apple. Okay, so I just finished Snow, Glass, and Apples by Neil Gaiman. I have thoughts. First of all, it's not a short story as I was expecting. It's actually a graphic novel. Which in itself isn't bad, but I also feel like that's not a short story. It may be a short graphic novel, it may be a short comic, but you can't categorize short story as the same thing as a comic. This is a dark retelling of Snow White from the perspective of the evil stepmother, the evil queen. I will insert one picture of the art because the art is absolutely breathtaking, but I'll get to my criticisms in a minute, but basically it follows the perspective of the queen. She is a witch and she puts a glamour on herself to appear more beautiful and attracts the king, Snow White's father. And so she marries him. At the time, Snow White is just a little child, and Snow White comes to her room and she's like, I'm hungry. So the queen offers to give her an apple, and the little girl takes her hand, bites into it, and starts sucking her blood. Turns out Snow White is a vampire in this world. So after the king kind of just withers away, which I assume is caused by Snow White, and the queen decides to cut out the heart of Snow White, which she successfully does and hangs it in her room, but it is still beating. And Snow White escapes into the forest. She's still alive even without her heart, and she starts eating and consuming forest creatures. The queen inserts blood, her own blood, into an apple. So, I was thinking maybe what she was doing was Snow White can't eat usual human food, but the blood that's in there will entice her to take a bite, so then she'll die because she's had human food, even if there was a little bit of blood in there. I thought that was it, but it's never really explained. It's very vague, like how it actually poisons her. But anyway, Snow White eats the apple and dies. And then a couple years later, a prince comes to town. The prince finds Snow White, wakes her up. I'll get into that in a minute. And then they take the queen, capture the queen. Snow White becomes queen herself and takes back her heart. And the queen is burned alive. And that's how the story ends. Here's my main thing. There is so much sleeping together scenes. Like, there's so much nudity. It's just so awkward. And it really brought down the story for me because I'm constantly being reminded, like, yeah, there are naked people running around. And I really dislike that. So that was my main criticism of the book. I love the idea of this story, though. The idea of twisting a fairy tale and making it opposite. And I love the idea of Snow White as, like, a vampiric, like, seductress. So it was a really intriguing premise, and the art was very beautiful. I just didn't like all the random nudity that did not need to be included. So I'm going on next to The Demon Lover by Elizabeth Bowen. Okay, I finished The Demon Lover, and let me just say I have thoughts. So basically this story follows this woman, Kathleen Drover, who is in her mid to late 40s. She's returning to this house that her family is selling to pick up a few things before they actually completely move out. And then she gets there, and then she finds a letter on a table in one of the rooms. And she's like, well, is it the landlord? Like, what's happening? So she goes and opens the letter, and it says creepy things. Today is our anniversary, and expect me at the appointed hour, at the arranged hour. And of course she's panicking because back in 1916 she was engaged to this soldier who was leaving for war, and he was reported missing. He never came back. She ended up maybe like 10 years later or so marrying another man and having children. This previous soldier who didn't treat her that well, he was a little bit creepy. None of her family really liked him that much. So immediately when she gets this strange letter, now in her 40s, she's like, well, is this tied to my missing fiance? Because he was never pronounced for sure dead. Like, he was never found. She panics. She runs out of the house, takes all her bags. And because she has so many bags to carry, though, she knows she needs to get a taxi. She can't just, like, walk to the station. So she sees a taxi stopped on, this corner, and she runs and gets in it, and they start driving. So she thinks she's safe. But then, of course, she realizes, I never told him the address that I wanted to go to. So then she taps on the glass of the taxi, the partition that is in between the passenger and the taxi driver, and he turns around and she gasps and is horrified, and she starts to scream. We never have himself described, but I assume it's the fiance. Then she is driven away screaming, and that's where the story ends. It was a vague story. Like with Harold, I would have liked to know a lot more, because I'm like, wait, was he alive? And is he a stalker? And is he just coming back? Like, what's happening? Next one I am reading is A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connell. Okay, quick update. I just came home from school, so I ended up reading 4 of these when I was at school. So I have a little catch up to do. So the first one I read is Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connell. So this book follows this family. There is a grandmother, a son, a daughter, and 3 kids. One is a baby, and then there's a boy and a girl. And they are going on a road trip down to Florida. And there's also rumors that this misfit, we don't really learn what his crime is, but he's escaped from prison of some sort. So they get partway, and the grandmother is like, oh, there's this really cool southern manor house plantation that I remember when I was a child, when it actually had somebody living there. So they turn off the main road because the kids are like, yeah, we really want to go to the plantation. The dad's like, I really don't want to take this detour, but they're like, oh, it'll be only like a few minutes off the road. So they go off the road, and the cat that they are traveling with, they have like a pet cat, jumps up and attacks the driver, the son, and he ends up like crashing the car, and the car like flips over twice. None of them are like horribly hurt, like they can't get out of the car. There's a few like minor injuries. So they get out of the car and they're like, well, what are we gonna do now? Then these guys drive up, 3 guys in a car. And what does the grandmother do? She recognizes one of the guys as the misfit, this like criminal that is on the run. And what does she do? She doesn't like keep her mouth shut and is like, oh, you know, because at first the guys are helping them. They're like, oh yeah, we'll check out your car. Like, obviously you were in a car accident. We'll help you. But like she bursts out, you're the misfit. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're an idiot. So what happens? But the guys eventually take them 2 by 2s into the forest and kill them, as like the grandmother is constantly like talking to the misfit, saying, you're really a good guy, I'm sure you're a good person deep down, don't do this. The grandmother's just so tone deaf this entire story. I was like, if she had kept her mouth shut, they would probably all be alive right now. The next story might be my favorite story that I've read so far. I mean, Edgar Allan Poe might be better, but this is The Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. So this short story follows this man, Rainsford, and he is this renowned hunter. He is traveling with a friend in the Caribbean. They're traveling to the Amazon to do some hunting, but he has hunted around the world. And he accidentally falls off the ship after hearing like gunshots in the darkness, and he ends up on this island. And at first he thinks it's probably an abandoned island. He's trying to find ways to survive. And then he comes across this massive like manor house. He calls it a chateau. He meets the owner of the house, who has this butler named Ivan. Ivan's this like giant of a man. But then the owner of the house is General Zaroff. And so Zaroff recognizes Rainsford immediately, and he's like, oh, you're this guy that like wrote a book on hunting, you're very knowledgeable about hunting wild game, different animals, and I'm fascinated with that concept too. That's why I bought this island, because I want to hunt the most difficult prey, the most dangerous prey, he says. So Rainsford is like, oh, well, what, do you hunt tigers? Like, they're really dangerous. And so they go around in circles, like, as Rainsford tries to figure out what exactly he's hunting on the island. But as it turns out, and I guess this, like, pretty early on, because, yeah, it seemed pretty obvious, he is not hunting animals, he is hunting humans. And he just categorizes them as animals. And Rainsford is the newest of his victims that he's decided that this will be fun. Like, he does it basically for fun. General Zaroff was a great hunter, but he discovered that it wasn't fun anymore because it wasn't a challenge. Rainsford, because he has this knowledge of like travel and survival and hunting, he sets up all these different like traps across the island to protect himself and keep himself alive. And General Zaroff constantly lets him live when he could have caught him, because for him it's less of like finishing the job and killing this guy and more of like the hunt itself is appealing to him. He jumps into the ocean to get away from the hounds. Zaroff returns to his mansion only to find that Rainsford is there, and Rainsford kills him. And that's how it ends. Like, the last line is something like, he slept in the bed soundly, like in the chateau. But I really loved this story. It was so good, and yet like some of it was obvious, but I was sure that Zaroff was gonna kill Rainsford, and I was just so astonished when like he actually beat him. Rainsford had the knowledge to beat this murderer. And it was a really cool short story. The next one I have to talk about, even though I don't like it, and that's The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So I read this book originally, the first time I was in college, so it was probably about 7 years ago I read it, and I really did not like it. It basically tells the story of this woman who slowly loses her sanity because her husband locks her in this room with yellow wallpaper, because he's told by the doctor that she's hysterical, she shouldn't be working, she should be out in the country alone, she shouldn't like, he even at one point like takes away her writing so she can't write. The story is told from these like diary entries that she writes as she is consumed by insanity. I think part of the reason why I don't like this story is just because it is so overhyped. Like, everyone says this is one of the best feminist stories ever. I'm like, no, it's really not. Narrator, who I don't know if we ever get her name. She is so over the top ridiculous. Like, she does feel hysterical, and the husband, yes, he's being foolish by like locking her away and not letting her visit friends or family, not letting her get a job or do her writing. But also, he's just listening to the doctor. He is trying to help her get better. He just doesn't know how, and she's constantly this emotional mess. She feels like such a stereotype for like a Victorian woman. Like you have all seen the scenes where like the woman is being hysterical and the guy like slaps her across the face. That was popular in movies in like the 30s or whatever. And I feel like this story exemplifies that she is completely irrational in so many ways. And yes, that's probably because of how society treats her partially, but also she got miserable and sick for a reason, and her husband, while clearly an idiot, he should not listen to the doctors. I mean, he's trying his best. She even says at one point that she knows that he loves her very much. And you can see that yeah, maybe he's handling this horribly, but he doesn't know. Like, he's trying to do the best he can. And so the story is just, I don't understand why it's so popular, to be honest. I reread it for this video because I was like, I wanna like give it a second chance, and no, I still disliked it. So yeah, never reading this story again. All right, and the last one I read is The Frolic from Songs of a Dead Dreamer by Thomas Ligotti. So this story follows this psychiatrist. Yeah, he's a psychiatrist who has moved with his wife and his young daughter. He became a psychiatrist at this, it sounds like a prison that is also called a hospital, but it's for like the criminally insane. And he's working with this one guy who they don't know what his name is. He was booked and tried as John Doe because he will not reveal his name, but his nickname is the Frolic. And because he caused what he did, his crime, as he was just frolicking, which is so creepy because as we go on with the story, basically most of the book is from the perspective of the doctor telling his wife about this case he has at work, and the daughter is upstairs in the bedroom sleeping as they talk about it. And basically the doctor talks about how this Frolic, John Doe, murdered small children, but he called his murdering spree frolicking, and like one of his latest murders was his latest frolic. The Frolic talks about how he's going to escape from the mental asylum, and of course that's foreshadowing for the end of the story when they realize that the stuffed animal that the doctor saw with his daughter earlier was not given to her by anyone they knew. So he runs up to her room to be like, well, where'd you get the stuffed animal? And she's missing from her bed, and it's assumed that the Frolic took her. So what a way to end a story, and it's very unpleasant. It's very interesting because the Frolic himself is a fascinating character. Even though we never meet him, we're just told about him through the doctor's perspective. It's interesting to see like how he talks in different voices, how he talks in different accents, almost as if he has a split personality or something like that. Does he? We don't know. He could just be a psychopath that is very good at covering his tracks. So I'm over halfway done now. I have 9 more that I need to read, so I will check back with you when I've read more. Okay, I am back, and it is almost Halloween. I even have my Halloween shirt on. So I finished the next 4 stories, which I don't know, I feel like either the stories are blending together or the shocking factor is going away because they're all supposed to be disturbing, and if everything is disturbing, then nothing becomes disturbing. The first one I read is The Landlady by Roald Dahl. Cannot speak his name. So basically this follows a young man who is going to get a job in Bath. He is from London, and he goes to find a B&B. It's late at night. He sees this house where it says bed and breakfast, and he's like, well, let's check this out. So he feels drawn to the house. So he goes up to the door, and this like elderly lady, well, she's described as like in her 40s, I think. She answers the door and lets him in, and I don't know, she's a little bit creepy. She's just super overly friendly. So she insists that he sign the guest book. And he discovers that there's only been 2 people who have stayed here before him, and the most recent person was like 2 years ago. And there's also like this bird and this dog that have been stuffed and are not alive, but they appear to be alive. Like, they're very lifelike because they're real, and she does that as a hobby. She is glad to have him write down his name so that she will remember him. So I assume she murders these young boys, or young men, I should say. They're not children. The story just ends, and we don't get to see if like she murders him or if she kidnaps him, and like, is she gonna stuff him like the rest of her pets? Like, I don't know. Nobody knows. So it's an interesting story, but like, one, not super disturbing, again, compared to the other ones. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting desensitized. So the next one is Harrison Bergeron from Welcome to the Monkey House by Kurt Vonnegut. I loved this one, but I also feel like this could have been a book, and it's a very small snapshot of this truly creepy world, and it's kind of like politically relevant, I guess. This is a world in 2081, so maybe like 60 years from now, where everyone has to be equal in every single way. And there is this like handicapper general that is in charge of like making sure everybody is like equal in every way. And it's kind of creepy because, like, for example, the main character, Harrison's dad, wears a like earpiece radio that shoots this like horrible sound into his ear because his IQ and intelligence is too high. So the sound counteracts his thoughts. Every 20 seconds, he has a horrible sound in his ear, which sounds absolutely horrible. And like this beautiful ballerina, she has like a mask on her face to make her look ugly so that, you know, she's balanced out with everybody. So like, everyone is equal in every single way. You have Harrison's mother and his father, and his mother is average in every way, and because of that, she doesn't have any like handicapper equipment on her, and her husband only has like the intelligence radio in his ear. And then their son is in prison. That's how the story starts. And on TV, they hear an announcement that Harrison has escaped. And then he just walks into the newsroom where they're giving news of him. And he basically, he's covered with this handicapper apparatus. Like, he has it all over his body, everything you could think of. He has like special like glasses to make him have worse eyesight. He has like not even the radio anymore. He has like these massive headphones on. He's covered with metal. He's got like this mask on to make him look ugly. He has everything. And so he announces, "I am your emperor. I am here to take over." And so he like picks out the pretty ballerina who is wearing a mask, and like she pulls off her mask, and she's beautiful, of course, and like they dance around, and then the handicapper general comes into the room and just like shoots him and her dead. And then the news cuts out, and Harrison's mother like starts to cry, and then she's like, "Oh, I wonder why I was crying. I don't remember. I feel like I saw something sad." And then the story just ends. You're like, okay. So first of all, a lot of ideas here that are very current. The whole debate between like equality of outcome with equality of opportunity. I won't get into that. But obviously this world takes it a little bit too far, because it's not as if everyone's equal. I mean, if you wanted to create a completely equal society, wouldn't you want to not handicap people, but bring everyone else up to that level? But I also realize that in a dictatorship, you wouldn't want people to be more intelligent. You would want them to be less intelligent because then they would be easier to control. So I get the point, but I don't know. There were a lot of different levels in this story that I'm still processing. So the next one is Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates. This is, again, one that I wasn't a huge fan of. It's hit or miss for me on this list. So basically this follows Connie, who is this pretty 15-year-old girl. She is popular. She's boys who like her. She's on a date with this other boy, and she sees this guy with shaggy black hair across from her. Did I mention she's 15? She's very young. And the next day he just shows up at the front of her house and is like, I want to take you on a drive and you're my girl now. And she starts like freaking out, obviously. At first she's like totally into him, which disturbed me because I'm like, girlfriend, he's creepy. But eventually like she's like, no, I'm not going to go on a drive with you. Like, I don't know who you are. And then he's like, no, you are. And he starts like threatening her. And there's like little things where she's like, she asks his age and he says 18. But then like she talks about how his friend has like a baby face of someone who's 40 that just looks younger. And then he has, I'm not sure that he's described as having this face that looks as if it's a mask that just looks younger. And he also has like special shoes that make him taller when he's shorter. So I'm like, well, who is this guy? I don't know. The story ends with her not like trying to fight him. I mean, she could totally take him. I'm sorry. But like not calling the police and like going out with him. And that's how the story ends. So I assume she died. I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? But I feel like there wasn't that much there to the story. Like, the first half of the story is just, like, describing Connie and her ridiculousness in how she views the world. There's a lot of reality to this story as well. You know, she is stalked by this guy who, like, within one day learns everything he can about her. And, like, he just expects her to love him. And that is a scary reality that a lot of young women experience. So on that hand, like, I enjoyed how it brought attention to that topic, but on the second hand, it wasn't really disturbing, and also it just had too many elements that I didn't care about or didn't make sense. Next one is The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs. So this story is the third one on this list that I've read before, and I remember really enjoying it. Basically, it is kind of inspired by Aladdin. There's this monkey paw that grants wishes, but for a price. The story starts off with this Sergeant Major Morris coming back from India, and he is visiting his friends, the Whites, Mr. White, Mrs. White, and their son Herbert. And he tells them the story of, like, when he was there in India, he discovered this thing called the monkey paw, which was supposed to grant you 3 wishes. And he's pretty invasive to them about, like, what exactly it is, but he's already made his wishes. A lot of other people have made their wishes, but he's still keeping on to it. So Mr. White is like, oh, but I want it. And Morris, like, throws it into the fire and is like, no, you shouldn't. And White saves it from the fire. And basically, long story short, Morris is like, fine, you can have it, but I recommend that you burn it. So the next day, or maybe that night, I don't remember, they decide to make a wish. The first wish. And the wife is like, or I don't remember who says it, but they're like, oh, just wish for like 200 pounds. So he's like, okay. So that's what he wishes for his first wish. And the money doesn't automatically come. So they're like, well, maybe it's like monkey's paw. It's not actually real. So the next day, this guy visits their house. And he's like, yeah, your son, he actually got crushed or caught in machinery at the factory he worked at. And he's dead. And you know how much we're going to give you as like reparations for his death? 200 pounds. So, of course, the couple is like, well, we just lost our son for 200 pounds. The wife demands that the husband wish for the son to return. So I wish my son was alive. That's what he wishes. And that night, they start hearing banging on the door, and it's almost as if there's a creature out there. And the woman is like, "Oh, it's my son, it's my son." And the Mr. White points out, no, there's something weird going on here. And we don't actually hear what his third wish is, but he goes up to the monkey's paw and he wishes for something. And then suddenly everything is silent. And I assume life goes back semi to normal, even though their son is dead. Because, like, she finally opens the door, and it's not like he was a zombie that came back and now he's back being dead. Like, she opens the door and there's nobody there. So I have 5 more to read. Tomorrow is Friday. So hopefully I will get them all read either tomorrow or Saturday. I am back. It's currently Friday, and I have until tomorrow to upload this. So I'm a little bit behind schedule. I finished 3 more of the books. I only have 2 more to complete, and I will do those tomorrow morning and then update you with my final thoughts on this series in general and like what I think of the picks overall. So the next one is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. So this is a world sometime in the future where we meet these 5 people that are surviving in this world that is controlled by this intelligent designer, this almost like cruel god. Apparently there was a World War III, and in order to like stop the World War III, created these hyper advanced computers called AM. The AM or AM, I don't know, took over and now controls the world and has completely eliminated life of all humans. Like, its existence is to torture humans. And the last 5 on Earth are these 5 individuals we meet. They've been stuck here for 109 years, and the computer won't let them die because it really enjoys torturing them. So basically the entire story follows them just surviving in this world where, like, they are absolutely tortured. One of the characters, the narrator, decides, let's just end it. So he ends up killing all 4 of the other members in this, like, ice cave where they're looking for food. Because he believes, well, death is the only way to be free. But of course, he's the only one left alive. And because of that, the computer tortures him, and he destroys his mouth entirely, which is where the title of the story comes from. I have no mouth, but I must scream. A brutal story of, like, a future possible if, like, AI does in fact take over. But I also felt like there's so many more compelling AI take over the world type stories that this one was just like, okay. Next one is really fascinating, and that is The Pear-Shaped Man by George R.R. Martin. It definitely has, so George R.R. Martin likes his, like, gratuitous scenes. Everybody knows that from Game of Thrones, and you can definitely see this in this short story. Basically, it follows this young woman, Jessie, who moves into this apartment with her roommate. Below their apartment lives this man underneath the basement stairs in this tiny little apartment, and Jessie just sees him smiling at her, and he is called the Pear-Shaped Man by everyone. He's just he's called pear-shaped because he has a big butt. Like his stomach and his hips and stuff like that. Very big. So basically, she sees him constantly, like, watching her, and she becomes obsessed with, like, learning about him and who he is, and nobody knows his name, and all he eats are his, like, Cokes and cheese doodles, which I don't know what cheese doodles are, but they're like a type of snack, apparently, cheesy snack. And I won't get into the details because, like, she keeps trying to research him and things like that, but in the end, she finally, like, goes to his apartment to confront him. It's a really awkward scene because he starts, like, undressing, and then, like, he goes into her, which I really thought was a euphemism for something else, but no, when she wakes up, they've switched bodies, and he is now in her body back upstairs, and she is stuck in the body of the Pear-Shaped Man, and that's how the story ends. He can still talk. Like, wouldn't the real Jessie, like, try to speak? Or, like, did she lose her memory being put in his body? Or, like, what's happening? I have a lot of
questions, but it was definitely disturbing. I'll give it that. The next one was a really intriguing story, and that is Serial by Jack Kilborn and Blake Crouch. So basically this follows, well, the first section we get introduced to Donaldson, and he is a serial killer who picks up hitchhikers and then murders them. The second section is about Lucy, who is a hitchhiker. And she gets picked up by these two men who she then gets them drunk and drugged, and then she drives them to a secluded place, takes off their clothes, ties them to the back of their car, and drags them very quickly across the highway or across the road until they die, because, you know, being drugged naked would not be pleasant if you're being drugged at the back of a car. But then, you know, at first I was like, well, how are these stories connected? But then, Donaldson picks Lucy up. I was like, ooh, two serial killers meet. And the story I feel like was definitely anticlimactic, because I was like, they just start fighting eventually, and they get tied together. She ties him to the back of the car to try to kill him, but then he ties her to himself, but then she's taken off the safety of the car, so the car just like goes really quickly and pulls them along, and I assume that both of them get killed by like the stunt that she pulled previously. So an intriguing premise of like two serial killers meeting. It's got the whole vibes of like Freddy versus Jason, where it's like these two brutal serial killers meet. But I also really wanted more, and I felt like the way they went down was kind of anticlimactic. I have two more stories to read. I'm going to read them tomorrow morning, and then I will get back to you for a final update.
Hello and happy Halloween. This is my last update, and I read the last two stories. The next one, number 18 of 19, is The Veldt by Ray Bradbury. I love Ray Bradbury. Everything I've read by him, I love. Something Wicked This Way Comes, The Halloween Tree, The Martian Chronicles, Fahrenheit 451. I just love all his writing. Okay, so yeah, it's not surprising I enjoyed the short story. Basically, it follows this family that is in this high-tech house that does pretty much everything for them. Like, it will tie their shoes, it will bake their food, give them all their food. But there's this one room that they call the nursery, where their two children play, which simulates like scenes. And one of the kids' favorite scenes is a savanna, I guess, a savanna in Africa. Basically, you have lions, you have zebras, you have like desert, you have wind, you have some trees, and all around the nursery are these almost screens to make you feel as if you are actually in that world. So really intriguing premise to start off. And the nursery starts to like wear on the parents, George and Lydia. Lydia just really wants to go back to being a regular household. There's also some like creepy incidences with the nursery room where the lions are getting closer, and the picture won't change for the husband. It will only change for the kids, the two kids, Peter and Wendy, which Peter and Wendy, what choices for names? I was thinking, like, is this Peter Pan? Like, what's happening here? But no relation that I could see. But some of the weird things that happen are like the lions almost seem real. Like they find a bloody wallet that is George's, the husband's. And they also find like this bloody scarf that is Lydia's. But they're like, well, it can't be the lions because they're literally on the screen. Like it's like watching TV, and like, it's not like the lions are going to come out and eat you. But they get really creeped out after a while. They hear strange noises in there. They hear like strange screams at night. So they decide to shut off the entire house and sell it and go back to being a normal family. The children are not happy with that. They almost have replaced this nursery, this house, as almost a parent figure. So they're like, you can't like kill this house. And so they lock their parents inside the nursery room. And we just hear screams as the lions consume them. And that's how the story ends. Very, very pleasant. Not sure what's going to happen when, like, the realtor is like, well, where are your parents? I enjoyed the story. I won't say it was, like, incredibly disturbing. But, again, it was a very fascinating, dystopian type feeling story. Because we are moving towards that in our lives. Like, Alexa, do this, turn off the lights, turn on the TV, so like we don't have to manually do those types of things. So the world is moving towards that, especially, I mean, I'm sure he wrote this in like the 50s or 60s, because that's when most of his stories were written, I believe. But it's interesting to see how it's even more true now than it was in the 50s or 60s. So I really enjoyed the story. The last story was Guts from Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. So, this one I DNF'd. Basically, it is about people pleasuring themselves and like putting things inside themselves, and then they get stuck, and then they rip out their guts and kill. You know what? I'm not going to talk about that anymore, because I got like 2 pages in of the like 6 pages, and I was like, I cannot read this. I know it's only 6 pages. It's a short story, but I cannot read this. So, now the question being, did BuzzFeed get it right? Are these stories really disturbing? Because I can say, oh, I dislike this story or I like this story, but the reality is, like, whether I liked it or not, you know, you can still have an extremely disturbing story that you don't really enjoy. So that's my category of how I'm going to judge whether these stories worked or didn't work. So you have 9 of them that I found disturbing, unless I miscounted them, which means that there are 10 that I did not find disturbing, which may just speak how like twisted I am, which is great, but also, you know, being disturbed is subjective. So do I think it's a good list? There were some in here I really enjoyed. Like, were the stories good? For the most part, I think they were good. Even the ones that I didn't enjoy, there were elements that were very well done. The only one I absolutely would not have on this list, I'm sorry, is Snow Glass Apples by Neil Gaiman. It is a comic book. I'm sorry, it's not a short story, it's a comic. It's 2 different genres. You can't put them together. I'm sorry. And, like, the only one, obviously, that I didn't finish was Guts. But all the rest, like, I enjoyed for different elements. Maybe they were okay, they weren't great, but they were all interesting in their own ways. And there were a vast variance of, this is more supernatural, this is more realistic of things that would actually happen. So I enjoyed seeing those elements. My favorite story, I think my favorite award of this list is probably going to go to The Most Dangerous Game. I think it's the one I enjoyed most. Have you read any of these short stories? Especially, like, are there any authors or short stories that you think should have been on this list that weren't? I definitely would have added so many different ones to this list. Like, there's no H.P. Lovecraft, and he has some of the most disturbing writing out there. Recently, I've been reading a lot of, like, Japanese horror. Edogawa Renpo. So, he was an author in the Taisho era. I learned a little bit about him in my Japanese class, and his stories are truly creepy. They made most of his stories into movies, if you're curious to watch them. But The Caterpillar and The Human Chair are the ones that I read. His pen name, Edogawa Renpo, was actually inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, because if you say Edgar Allan Poe really fast, it sounds like Edgar Allan Poe. Interesting. But, like, I would have added him to the list. There's also Algernon Blackwood. There's so many creepier authors that I would have added to this list before some of the ones featured on this list, even though, for the most part, I enjoyed all these stories. But I'm curious to see if there's any authors or short stories you would add to this list if you were making it. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Halloween. I will see you guys in the next video with my wrap up for all the books I read in October. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe. I will see you all in the next video. I post every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great week. Bye.